welcome back to another episode of I'll Allow It Nevada, your go-to podcast for insightful glimpses into the Nevada judiciary. I'm your host, Seth Easley, representing the Supreme Court of Nevada Administrative Office of the Courts. And joining me today is guest host Philip Fess.
Thank you so much, Seth. I'm very excited to be here and really looking forward to our talk from Jennifer today.
As am I. Thank you very much, Philip. Today, we are exploring a topic that's not only a cornerstone of Nevada's economy, but also a fascinating area of law, gaming law. To guide us through this introduction to gaming law, I'm thrilled to be joined by Jennifer Roberts, a leading expert in gaming law with years of experience in this field. Jennifer has been at the forefront of navigating the complex regulatory landscape that governs gaming in Nevada, and she's here to share her insights on this area of law. Thank you very much for being on the show with us, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me here. I'm very excited to be here.
So to kind of just kick off this discussion, can you start by explaining just what gaming law encompasses and maybe what other areas of law it intersects with?
Of course. I remember when I first was going to study gaming law, there was a joke at my former employer in Utah where they said, "Oh, you're going to practice law about wildlife." But that's really not what it is. Gaming law is the study of the legal landscape and regulatory landscape involving gambling.
Right. And does it intersect with any other areas of law routinely or?
Yeah, actually, it really intersects with almost every facet of law that you can think of. For example, there is gambling on riverboats in certain jurisdictions in the United States. And you have to have some knowledge of law governing navigable waters, right? So you can actually encompass all areas of law when you're practicing in this field. But there is a distinction between gaming law and having clients in the gaming industry. Gaming law and gaming lawyers really focus their practice on appearing before the regulators, lobbying on gaming law legislation, really kind of heavily tied to the gambling industry and the regulation of gambling. Whereas, there are many lawyers out there that have clients within this gaming industry because it's so widespread across the United States.
Okay, interesting.
Of course, and I know you're an expert on gaming law present state, and as you kind of hinted there, it's evolving all the time. What I'm curious about, having grown up here in Las Vegas, I know you can probably speak to the characters and players over the years adjacent to gaming law or a part of it. But I'm just very curious about the history, what it was like prior to legalization and the restrictions and regulations at the time that came after it.
Yeah, absolutely. With gambling in Nevada, we've had a long history of it here. It really even preceded the modern legalization of it. Gambling has been present ever since, even before we became a state, where we had a lot of, residents that were involved in the mining industry, and during their off times, they would engage in gambling. So even if it wasn't legal, it was an activity that was frequent. But then there were periods of legalization, even before the modern legalization date of 1931, where, it was really just legalized with maybe very little or absent of regulatory oversight. So it was kind of legalized, but accepted as long as you didn't highlight it or it wasn't visible to the public. But then there was a period in 1910 where it became a felony to operate gambling. There was a lot of backlash against gambling and the characters that were involved in it at the time. And then, a few years later, it became accepted that maybe we would have gambling, but it was very limited to like $2 to be able to participate. So it was very low stakes gambling. But then in 1931, a Humboldt County assemblyman proposed to legalize gambling within the state of Nevada, and it actually passed. and the governor signed it into law. And that is the date, March 19th, 1931, is the date where gambling was legal in Nevada and has been legal ever since. Modern regulation really developed in the 1950s. When gambling was legalized in 1931, it was really kind of left to local sheriff's departments to collect taxes, very little regulation. But as you may or may not be aware, you had a lot of interesting, again, characters that were coming into the state to operate gambling. And that's where a lot of Las Vegas developed. You had organized crime members and those associated with organized crime that started operating gambling. And that led to the federal government basically saying that they were going to intervene into our industry and shut it down. So there was a commitment made by Governor Grant Sawyer to allow for the regulation and finding of suitability and upholding integrity in gambling to be able to weed out organized crime. It was quite an effort, though.
Right.
It took a while.
So that provides some context onto why, I guess, gaming regulators were formed. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, so gaming regulation, again, was really in response to the federal government saying that they wanted to shut down our industry. Even historically, we've had some kind of interesting gambling features, including from even right after legalization in 1932, for 35 years, we had a casino that operated within our state prison.
Fascinating.
It's a very fun fact. I would recommend Googling it, looking up Nevada prison casino, and it will explain how there was actually an operating casino operated by the prisoners for the prisoners where money was deposited into like a prison fund. So that's kind of a fun fact. And it was shut down because of a riot that occurred at the prison unrelated to the casino.
When was that?
1967.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting.
And it was never licensed by the regulators. It was not a licensed casino. It just happened to pop up and, was operated for 35 years. So, but that's a fun fact about, gambling presence in Nevada. But really, the regulation developed because of the threats of organized crime that the federal government was really focused on eliminating throughout the country. And so, again, Governor Grant Sawyer decided to create the Nevada Gaming Commission and Gaming Control Board. First, it was the Gaming Control Board, which was an arm of the Nevada Tax Commission. And that was set up to basically look at the suitability of people that wanted to operate gambling. And then just in the late 1950s, you had the Nevada Gaming Commission created and it took away from the tax commission on how to regulate gambling and ensure that there was honesty and integrity in gambling. And again, it took many years, and it took actually many court cases to test that system. One of the most famous series of cases involves a character that some people may be familiar with, a real person. His real name is Frank Rosenthal, also called Lefty. But you might have seen his depiction in the movie Casino. He was played by Robert De Niro under the name of Sam Ace Rothstein. But Frank Rosenthal was an operator in Nevada. He operated a handful of casinos, including the famous Stardust Casino. And he was called forward by the regulators who, asked him a series of questions about his associations, including with Tony Spilatro, who had organized crime ties. And so he was denied his suitability. And through a series of court cases that went to the Nevada Supreme Court, it was decided that our system of regulation in Nevada that was created to get rid of organized crime was a solid system. And it was something that, was the right of the state to do. And it was their ability to be able to deny him a license based upon his criminal associations and criminal past.
These names are bringing back memories, Spilatro, Rosenthal, because I can remember as a child those names and images plastered all over the local news at the time. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, and represented by a famous person who used to be mayor of the city of Las Vegas, Oscar Goodman.
Thank you again. That is true. And something else I forgot just now, but you're absolutely right.
And another name that at the time that he was denied the licenses, and as depicted in the movie, the chair of the Nevada Gaming Commission at the time was Harry Reid.
Wow, it's fascinating, all the players. And again, I love that you mentioned that movie because it's so accessible. It would warrant a rewatch to kind of get an idea of what was going on at the time.
Absolutely. I've talked with many people that remember those times and feel that the movie is pretty accurate depiction. Obviously, there's going to be Hollywood elements to it, but there's a lot of truth to it as well.
So you kind of mentioned a bit already. So you mentioned the case with Rosenthal and how that kind of just solidified and validated the kind of, I guess, if you will, effectiveness of the Gaming Control Board. Was there any other legal milestones or landmark cases that kind of shaped gaming law in Nevada?
I would say that was one of the most famous and comprehensive laws or cases that, because he had a series of cases, there were at least 4 cases that he took before the courts that helped confirm our laws. There are several cases out there that really, I think one case involving like enforceability of gaming debt. Also, a really important case is that's helped with patron disputes. It's a case involving IGT slot machines, and it validates the enforceability of language that you find commonly on slot machines, which is malfunctions, void, pay and play. So if you ever see a slot machine, you're going to see language written on it that malfunctions, void, all pay and play, because if a slot machine has an error internally, then you can't be paid out for an error that occurs within the slot machine. So that was a really important case for solving patron disputes.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this episode of I'll Allow It Nevada. We're always striving to bring you valuable insights and education, not just for judicial officers, but anyone interested in the Nevada judiciary. If you find our content helpful or intriguing, please share your experience with your friends, family, and colleagues. Your support helps us reach a broader audience and ensures that more people can benefit from our discussions. Thank you for listening and supporting I'll Allow It Nevada. So let's shift this a little bit. So can you tell us a bit about the current state of gambling?
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand, really what is gambling? We all have images when you say the word gambling. Probably a lot of it comes into mind, slot machines or table games, a casino environment. But gambling is a lot more than that. If you think about gambling that's legal in 45 states in the form of lottery, that is a form of gambling. The way you define gambling is pretty simple. There have to be 3 elements present, and that would be prize, winning a prize, some form of money, a vehicle, anything usually of economic value is how courts have determined what a prize amounts to. And then you have consideration, meaning you pay money. And again, it's usually something of economic value, but those are court cases throughout the country that have tried to define what constitutes consideration. Usually it's something of economic value, like money, or a representative of money, like a Tito ticket that you put into the slot machine. And so a representative of value as consideration, that's your second element. And the last is chance. So the chance element, again, is the subject of many court cases throughout the country. And that's because if it's a game of skill, it's not gambling. If it's a game of chance, it is gambling. And so the most common approach to this that courts have used that is the most represented across the country. So most courts across the country have considered a game of chance using the dominant factor test. And that if you think about chance and skill on a spectrum, when you hit the middle of the spectrum, whichever one is just over on the other side of the line, whether it's chance or skill, that determines whether it's a dominant factor. So if it's 51% skill versus 49% chance, it's not going to meet the elements of gambling. If it's 51% chance and 49% skill, then you've entered into a game of chance, which constitutes gambling if the other two elements are met. So prize, chance, and consideration are the elements of gambling. So that's why you see other forms of gambling out there like lottery. You pay money to participate and it's a random draw of numbers. Prize, chance, consideration. And there's all varieties of gambling activities that can fall within that definition. So the current state of gambling is you actually have a majority of the states. You have 45 states that have a form of lottery. You have 40 states that have some form of casino, whether it's operated privately by a business or whether it's operated by a tribe or a government. So you have at least 40 states that have casino gambling. And now a component of gambling, sports betting, has expanded rapidly since a federal law was invalidated by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2018. And you see sports betting present in 38 states now.
Yeah, I think I see ads for it all the time now. Just watching, like tuning into the football game, you'll see ads for sports betting, which is not something I remember growing up.
Yeah, there was a law that was passed in 1992 called the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, also referred to as PASPA. And what that law did is it basically prohibited states or tribes or any kind of government from allowing sports betting to be legal and regulated in all the U.S. states. Nevada was given a carve out, and we were the only state that had full-scale sports wagering under this exemption under PASPA. But New Jersey was given 1 year to legalize sports betting under PASPA when it was enacted in 1992. And they decided, that some politics got involved and that year lapsed. Well, fast forward several years later, they wanted to have sports betting because it was becoming more popular. It was becoming more easy to conduct with mobile and digital technology. And so they tried to pass a law, and sports leagues that were given power to enforce the law decided to challenge it. And it went through a series of court cases, ultimately made it to the U.S. Supreme Court that invalidated PASPA as a violation of the U.S. Constitution.
That's a very interesting context. I didn't know all that stuff was going on in that realm.
Yeah. And as soon as it was invalidated, we've seen the fastest growth of gambling that the United States has ever seen, now that you have 38 states that have legalized it in some form. And that was, again, just 2018 when it was invalidated.
Okay, so can you tell us a bit about any of the most pressing legal issues currently facing the gaming industry in Nevada?
There's some legal issues that have been talked about. I was just part of a panel that talked about the role of cannabis in gaming. Currently, the gaming regulators have prohibited businesses and operations from having interests in cannabis industry. There's legislation that was passed that doesn't allow like cannabis lounges within the resort corridor. So the one pressing issue that might come up is whether the federal government changes the classification of cannabis from a drug that's equivalent to like heroin to a drug that is equivalent to a prescription such as Tylenol with codeine. So that would be interesting to see whether that changes the impact in Nevada. Nevada also is, faced with issues that, relate to federal government oversight. I just read that there might be a bill that is proposed by the federal government to have some form of regulation or oversight into sports betting. That would certainly impact Nevada. There's a host of issues as it relates to increased technology. We'll see if, you'll ever see mobile types of activity. It is legal, but there's some restrictions in the state what mobile activity can do. Currently, it's restricted to online poker being played within the state.
So you mentioned a little bit about the technology piece. How has gaming law been impacted by new technologies, and how has it responded? Things, I guess, such as online gaming, for example.
Sure. I think what online gaming has presented is a whole new area of issues that lawyers have to be cognizant of in this field. So things like data privacy and protection of data that you supply. When you set up an account for an online gaming activity, you're providing a lot of personal information. You're providing, your date of birth and your name, your address. And so how is that protected is always an issue. There's plenty of other issues about knowing how the technology works and how it fits within a regulatory system that was created and modified throughout the years. But you have developments that, you have to maybe work with the regulators to adjust the regulations to address. And there's always responsible gambling with online gaming. You don't have the visibility that you have with patrons that come into your casino. So, providing tools to patrons on how to gamble responsibly and providing, access to resources to help them with any gambling problems. You want to make sure that that's communicated and accessible in an online environment.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot, especially on the technology side. Things just change really fast. So I know it's interesting to see how the industry in that area of law will have to respond to such rapid changes. Are there any other challenges facing, I guess, the industry or gaming law?
So I think there's always challenges with illegal gambling. When you're a legal gambling operator, you are faced with competition from illegal sources. So from a law enforcement perspective, are there tools and resources to help combat that? As from an operator perspective, you're paying your taxes, you're highly regulated, you are subject to some strict oversight, and to suddenly have a competitor that has none of that, as well as none of the requirements for making sure that someone's not wagering while they're underage, to provide responsible gambling protections, to even pay out winners. That's what you're competing with, and you want to make sure that it doesn't tarnish the reputation of gambling. So you want to make sure and try to work with law enforcement for them to combat that as much as possible. It's very difficult, however, when you have operators that are operating outside the country You can't just go in and shut down a business in another country. So I know that there are, voices being heard from the industry at a federal level to ask for assistance in trying to shut it down. Some states have taken action against those operators by, sending them cease and desist notices, trying to do everything that they can within, their capabilities to shut it down. There's also new forms of kind of gambling adjacent. It might not meet all three elements of gambling, or that at least that's the argument. For example, there's something called sweepstakes casinos. And I know like the Michigan Gaming Control Board has issued directives for those types of casinos, which, are advertised or have become known as kind of social casinos. The Michigan Gaming Control Board has taken the approach that those are forms of gambling and should not be operated without being licensed and regulated. So, yeah, there's definitely developments in this area and ongoing issues with having to compete with an illegal market.
So out of curiosity, what is the distinction between I think you said sweepstakes casino versus a casino that fits the traditional definition?
Yeah, sweepstakes casino, there's ways that you can participate without satisfying the three elements of gambling. In a sweepstakes, you don't meet the elements of gambling because you take out the element of consideration. So you might have a game of chance and you might have a prize, but you don't have the element of consideration because you usually have some kind of alternate method of free entry. So I'll give you an example of a sweepstakes that a lot of people might be familiar with. And that would be the McDonald's Monopoly game. So if you think about the McDonald's Monopoly game that was pretty popular, that would be, you usually would buy like a Big Mac or a French fry, some type of product from McDonald's or a drink, and you get 2 pieces to fill up a Monopoly board. That's not considered gambling because even though you get a prize and there's no skill in whatever, pieces that you get for your Monopoly board. And you would think that you have to pay consideration because you have to purchase French fries or a drink. However, you actually don't because they have this, what they call an AMOE or alternate method of entry. You could actually get free game pieces if you mail in a letter or sign up on a website. So you don't actually have to buy French fries. And that's why you see these qualifications in these types of games as, no purchase necessary. They're telling you that there is a free way to enter. And so it's structured similarly to that with these sweepstakes casinos, is that they're going to say that you don't have to pay to participate, even though a lot of people will, to maybe get there faster or get more coins to be able to play the, simulated slot machines.
I see. Okay. So to kind of start wrapping up this conversation, what do you see in the future for gaming law in Nevada?
Yeah, I think, we've had historically, again, since 1931, we've had legalized gambling. We've had a solid system of regulation since 1954, and we've worked with the federal government to, cooperate and make an honest system for gambling activity that has integrity and that people that participate are suitable. So there's a really good system in Nevada for regulating gambling. And I think that the future of gambling is, technology is always going to be there. And, how the regulators adapt to that is something that will always be on the minds of operators. But it's been successful so far. We've had such a longstanding history of gambling in this state. And I think that we'll continue to see it thrive and develop. We've had very successful gambling on the Strip, and it continues to modernize and integrate non-gambling features. And I think it's exciting to watch. And I think the gaming law and regulation will be adaptable to adjust to the interests of the public.
So one last question.
Sure.
What advice would you give to those who are new to gaming law or who are maybe interested in the field?
Yeah, there's certainly opportunities to study gaming law in Nevada. Of course, the Boyd School of Law has an advanced degree in gaming law and regulation, but our regulators and have an open forum where you can observe meetings. You have a lot of resources out there, articles, books. There's a great, UNLV has some great publications in gaming law. And I think just understanding that gaming law has many facets, whereas including, if you work in the gaming industry, you're going to have a lot of legal issues that face you, whether it's employment law, whether it's criminal law, whether it's corporate law. There's all sorts of areas of law that are part of this industry. So it's hard to just say gaming law is one thing, but if you're gaming law focused, you're going to really understand and navigate through the gaming law regulatory system.
That's very interesting. Thank you. So I just want to extend my deep appreciation to you for joining us. Was there anything else you wanted to share with the audience prior to closing out the podcast?
No, I don't think so. I think that, again, thanks for having me. I've really learned a lot from a lot of mentors in this space, including one of my current mentors, Ellen Whittemore, and Bob Fess, who's kind of known as the grandfather of gaming law, was around when the development of the modern gaming system was there. I learned a lot from him at my former law firm, and I just think finding that mentorship in this space is really important, and I'm thankful that I had that. So thank you for having me and allowing me to talk about gambling law.
It's been a pleasure, and you've shared a lot of really interesting and valuable information. I look forward to sharing it with our listeners.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
A heartfelt appreciation to our guest and to everyone who has tuned in to this episode. Before we wrap up, here are a couple of important reminders. For continuing legal education credit, be sure to complete a certificate of attendance and email it to jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov. If you have any questions, topic suggestions, or comments, we welcome your input. Please email them to jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov. We value and look forward to hearing from our listeners. Stay tuned for more episodes of All Out Nevada, released bi-monthly. This is Seth Easley signing off. Take care, Nevada.